My name is Naomi Ellison, and 3 hours before my 21st birthday dinner, my mother handed me a velvet folder and smiled. After dessert, she said, "You're finally going to sign the papers your grandfather wanted." I smiled back. Of course. Then I walked upstairs, locked my bedroom door, opened my laptop, and sent one email that my grandfather had prepared years before. Less than 90 seconds later, every share of the family vineyard, every acre of land, every investment account, and every trademark my grandfather had spent 50 years building became permanently protected under a private family foundation that only I controlled. You see, Grandpa Leonard had secretly finalized all the legal paperwork with his attorney before he passed away, leaving the final execution completely up to me. That single email triggered the immediate digital filing and notification to the estate lawyers, locking the assets instantly. By the time my mother raised her champagne glass that evening, everything she planned to take from me had already slipped beyond her reach. She just didn't know it yet. Before I tell you what happened, hit like and subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your city. I always enjoy seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me take you back 9 years. I was 12 when I first understood that my grandfather loved the vineyard more like a child than a business. Every Saturday morning before sunrise, he picked me up in his faded green pickup truck. "Morning, sunshine," he always called through the rolled-down window. Even during winter, even when it snowed, his vineyard rested outside the small town of Ashford Ridge, where rolling hills stretched for miles and neat rows of grapevines disappeared into the horizon. The place wasn't luxurious. There was an old stone farmhouse, a weathered red barn, a tasting room with uneven wooden floors, and a porch where my grandfather insisted every important decision should be made. The air always smelled like fresh soil, oak barrels, grapes, and rain. To most people, it was simply a winery. To Grandpa Leonard, it was home. "Come on," he'd laugh. "Those vines aren't going to prune themselves." He never treated me like a child. He handed me real tools, real responsibilities. He showed me how to recognize diseased leaves before they spread, how to repair irrigation pipes, how to clean wine barrels without damaging the oak, how to record harvest temperatures in worn leather notebooks. "If you take care of the vines," he'd tell me, "they'll take care of you." Grandma Eleanor usually waited inside with homemade soup, warm bread, and apple pie cooling on the kitchen counter. The farmhouse kitchen always felt safe. The old clock ticked loudly. Soft jazz played from a dusty radio. The windows overlooked endless rows of vineyards glowing under the afternoon sun. Sometimes Grandpa would quietly watch me helping Grandma wash dishes. He'd smile without saying anything. Only years later would I understand why. One evening we sat together on the porch while orange light covered the hills. He placed 2 mugs of hot chocolate on the railing. "You know why this place survived so many hard years?" I shrugged. "Good grapes?" He laughed. "No." He pointed toward the vineyard, because somebody always loved it more than they loved money. I didn't fully understand. I was 12. To me, adults simply owned things. I had no idea that someday those words would become the reason my entire family turned against each other. Back home, life looked very different. My parents lived comfortably, not rich, not poor. Comfortably. But appearances mattered. The newest SUV, the biggest Christmas decorations, country club memberships, designer furniture. Everything had to look successful. My younger brother Ethan was the center of almost every conversation. His soccer tournaments, his private coaching, his expensive travel teams. Every achievement earned applause. When I brought home first place from the regional science competition, Mom smiled without looking up from her phone. "That's nice, sweetheart." Dad nodded. "Good job." Then he immediately asked Ethan about his upcoming championship game. I stopped expecting more after that. One evening during dinner, Dad casually mentioned Grandpa's vineyard. "Commercial land prices are exploding." Mom looked interested. "Developers are buying everything outside Ashford." Dad sliced another piece of steak. "If Leonard ever sells, we'll all be set." "Grandpa isn't selling," I answered. Dad laughed. "He says that now. He built it," I replied quietly. "He loves it." Dad smiled the way adults smile when they think children don't understand the real world. Everyone has a price. I looked down at my plate. For Grandpa, I wasn't sure that was true. That night, while putting leftovers into the refrigerator, I noticed a glossy real estate brochure lying on the counter. Luxury Hills Development, Future Residential Estates. Across the top, someone had circled one sentence with a pen. Prime vineyard property wanted. I stared at it much longer than I should have. Someone in our house was already imagining Grandpa's vineyard as something else. Not memories, not family, not history. Just land. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen. But for the first time, something didn't feel right. 2 years passed quietly. At least, that's how it looked from the outside. Inside our family, something had already begun to change. Grandpa Leonard grew slower. Not weak. Just older. He still insisted on climbing ladders to repair the barn roof himself. He still refused to let anyone else prune the oldest vines. But every now and then, I'd catch him rubbing his lower back when he thought nobody was looking. Grandma Eleanor noticed too. She'd quietly take the ladder from him. "I'll hold it," she'd say. He'd grin. "You've been holding me together for 40 years. She would roll her eyes. Someone has to. Watching them together made love seem simple. Not flowers, not expensive gifts. Just two people who never stopped showing up. That autumn, Grandpa invited me to help bottle the year's harvest. The winery buzzed with activity. Workers rolled oak barrels across the concrete floor. Forklifts carried wooden pallets stacked with empty bottles. The sweet smell of crushed grapes filled every room. Grandpa handed me a clipboard. "You're in charge of inventory today." "I am?" "You pay attention better than most adults." For 12 straight hours, we worked side by side. Near sunset, everyone finally went home. Only Grandpa and I remained. He locked the tasting room, switched off the lights, and carried 2 folding chairs onto the porch. The hills glowed deep orange beneath the setting sun. Without looking at me, he asked, "Naomi, what do you think makes something worth protecting?" I thought for a moment. "Because it's expensive?" He smiled. "No, because people need it." "Closer." I waited. He looked across the vineyard. "It's worth protecting because someone sacrificed for it." He pointed toward the oldest vines. "My father planted those." Then, toward the stone wall. "My grandfather built that by hand." Finally, he looked at me. "And one day, someone has to decide whether those sacrifices mattered." I didn't know how to answer. I simply nodded. A month later, everything changed. Grandpa suffered a mild heart attack while repairing a broken irrigation pump. Thankfully, one of the workers found him almost immediately. He survived, but the doctors ordered him to slow down. No heavy lifting, no climbing, no 12-hour workdays. Grandpa hated every one of those rules. "I've been working this land since I was 16. The doctor smiled politely. "And we'd like you to keep doing it when you're 80. Grandpa wasn't convinced. After the hospital, I started visiting every weekend again. Not because he asked, because he never would. I mowed grass, balanced invoices, helped organize deliveries, even learned how to manage online wine orders. Grandpa watched quietly, sometimes correcting me, mostly letting me figure things out. One Saturday afternoon, while sorting old paperwork inside the office, I heard voices outside the window. Dad and my Uncle Martin. I froze. Neither of them usually visited unless there was a holiday. Curious, I stayed where I was. "We need to think long term," Uncle Martin said. Grandpa answered calmly. "I already am." Dad sighed. "The vineyard is worth millions now. It isn't for sale." "You keep saying that." "Because it's true." A long silence followed. Then Uncle Martin spoke again. "What happens after you're gone?" Grandpa's voice stayed perfectly calm. "That's already been taken care of." Dad laughed softly. "You finally wrote the will?" "I've made my arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" "You'll know when you need to." The conversation ended there. But I noticed something. Dad didn't look satisfied. He looked frustrated. Over the next year, Those conversations happened more often, sometimes after Sunday lunch, sometimes during birthdays, sometimes while pretending to discuss taxes. The words changed. The meaning never did. Development, investment, opportunity, expansion, liquid assets, market value. Every conversation somehow circled back to the vineyard. Meanwhile, Grandpa talked about weather, harvest quality, soil health, family recipes, completely different worlds. When I turned 16, Grandma Eleanor became ill. It started with simple fatigue. Then appointments. More appointments. Tests. Specialists. The diagnosis came quietly. An aggressive form of cancer. She never cried, not once in front of me. Instead, she worried about Grandpa. He forgets to eat when he's stressed, she whispered one afternoon while we folded laundry together. Promise you'll keep an eye on him. I promise. She smiled. I knew I could count on you. Treatment lasted almost a year. Some weeks looked hopeful. Others didn't. Grandpa practically moved into the hospital. He still tried running the vineyard every morning before visiting Grandma every afternoon. He slept maybe 4 hours each night. One rainy evening, I found him sitting alone inside the empty barrel room. He looked exhausted. I don't know how to do this, he admitted quietly. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard him sound afraid. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "If I lose her." His voice broke. I lose half of myself. I had never seen my grandfather cry before. That night, I cried too. Because for the first time, I realized even the strongest people eventually need someone to lean on, and I intended to be that person. 2 years later, Grandma Eleanor passed away quietly in her sleep. Grandpa was devastated. He aged 10 years in a single month. My parents immediately tried to step in, offering to manage the business to relieve his stress. But Grandpa saw right through them. He knew they wanted to sell to the developers. Knowing his time was short, Grandpa called me and his longtime attorney into his office. Together, they had secretly established a private family foundation. Grandpa legally transferred ownership of everything to the foundation, naming me as the sole director. But there was a catch. To prevent my parents from interfering while he was alive, the foundation would only be activated by a digital signature from me when I turned 21. They will try to make you sign the vineyard over to them the second they can, Grandpa whispered, handing me a flash drive with the encrypted email instructions. When that day comes, you protect our home. Grandpa passed away just 6 months before my 21st birthday. My parents immediately assumed control of the estate, believing there was no valid will. They didn't know about the foundation. They spent months preparing legal papers to divide and sell the land, planning to force me to sign away my hereditary shares at my birthday dinner. Which brings us back to that evening. After dessert was served, Mom placed the velvet folder on the table and handed me a pen. "Sign here, Naomi," she said smoothly. "It's what's best for the family. We're selling the land to Luxury Hills." I looked at the documents, then looked her dead in the eye. "No," I said, putting the pen down. "I won't sign." Dad stood up, his face turning red. "You don't have a choice. We control the estate." "Actually, you don't," I replied calmly. 90 seconds before I came downstairs, I activated Grandpa's private foundation. Every acre, every stock, and every trademark belongs to it now. And I am the only person who controls it. "You have nothing to sell." The look of sheer shock and fury on their faces was something I will never forget. Mom dropped her champagne glass. It shattered against the floor. They didn't give up easily, of course. The moment they realized they had been outsmarted, they hired the most expensive lawyers they could find. They launched a massive legal war against me, claiming Grandpa wasn't in his right mind and accusing me of fraud. 6 months passed before I walked through the vineyard without expecting another legal letter. The lawsuits were over. The foundation had survived every challenge, every appeal, every accusation. The courts ruled exactly what Grandpa Leonard's attorney had predicted years earlier. The vineyard had never belonged to my parents. It had belonged to the foundation, and I was its only director. Mom eventually stopped calling. Dad sent one short message every few weeks. Sometimes it simply read, "I hope you're doing okay." For a long time, I didn't know how to answer. Some wounds don't heal because someone says they're sorry. They heal because enough time passes that the pain no longer controls every morning. One crisp October afternoon, I reopened the old tasting room. The same uneven wooden floor. The same oak barrels. The same photographs hanging on the walls. Only this time, families filled the building again. Children laughed while chasing each other across the lawn. Couples walked slowly between the vines. Older neighbors sat on the porch drinking fresh apple cider. The vineyard finally felt alive again. Not because it was making money, because it had become exactly what Grandpa always wanted. A place people loved. A few weeks later, my attorney called. Everything is officially complete. The foundation is permanent. No one can challenge it again. I thanked her. Then I drove to the highest hill overlooking the vineyard. The wind moved gently through thousands of vines, exactly the way it had when I was 12. Inside the farmhouse, I began organizing Grandpa's office one final time. Most drawers contained invoices, old harvest records, weather journals, receipts dating back nearly 40 years. Then I noticed something unusual. One small cedar box, tucked behind a stack of accounting books. It wasn't locked. Inside sat a single envelope. Across the front, in Grandpa Leonard's familiar handwriting, were only 3 words. For Naomi. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was one handwritten letter. My sunshine, if you're reading this, then everything happened exactly the way I feared it might. That thought makes me sad. But another thought makes me smile. You were stronger than I ever needed you to be. People often confuse ownership with love. They believe buying something means they understand its value. They're wrong. The first year I planted these vines, nearly half of them died. Everyone told me to quit. Your grandmother didn't. She handed me another shovel. That vineyard exists because someone chose to stay when leaving would have been easier. Never forget that. One day people will ask how much this land is worth. Very few will ask how many birthdays were celebrated here. How many children learned to ride bicycles on these roads? How many weddings began beneath those oak trees? Or how many sunsets your grandmother and I watched from that porch? Money measures price. Love measures everything else. I didn't choose you because you were the oldest, or because you were the smartest. I chose you because every time you came here you asked what needed fixing before you asked what anything was worth. That is something no document can teach. Take care of this place. One day it will take care of someone else. With all my love, Grandpa. By the time I finished reading, tears blurred every word on the page. I looked out the office window. The afternoon sun stretched across the vineyard, exactly like it had all those years ago. For a long time, I simply sat there, not crying because I had won, crying because I finally understood why Grandpa never argued with my parents. He already knew that people chasing money almost never recognize the things that truly matter. The following spring, I started a scholarship in my grandparents' names. Every year, local students studying agriculture, environmental science, or conservation could apply. The first award wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. Grandpa always believed small things, cared for long enough, eventually became something extraordinary. One Saturday morning, my younger cousin Lily visited the vineyard. She couldn't have been older than 11. She wandered through the rows of vines, asking endless questions. Why are some leaves smaller? Why do the barrels smell funny? Can grapes really sleep during winter? I laughed, because years earlier, those had been my questions. Before she left, she looked up at me. Can I come help again next weekend? I smiled. Every weekend if you want. She grinned so widely that I saw myself at her age. Maybe that was how tradition survived. Not through paperwork. Through people. Sometimes strangers ask if I hate my parents. I don't. Hate is heavy. I've carried enough weight already. What happened still hurts. Probably always will. But protecting something isn't the same as taking revenge. I didn't save the vineyard to punish anyone. I saved it because I made a promise. And some promises deserve to outlive the people who made them. Early one morning, almost exactly a year after my 21st birthday, I carried a cup of coffee onto the old porch. Mist floated above the vines. Birds sang somewhere beyond the hills. The same rocking chair Grandpa loved still rested beside mine. Empty. But somehow, it never felt abandoned. I closed my eyes for a moment. The wind carried the familiar scent of grapes, damp earth, and old oak. For just a second, it felt like both my grandparents were still there, watching another sunrise over the land they spent their lives protecting. I smiled, not because everything had turned out perfectly. It hadn't. Families break. Trust disappears. Some apologies never come. But love, real love, can still leave behind something stronger than greed. It can leave behind roots, and roots, if they're cared for, survive every storm. That's my story. If it meant something to you, share it with someone who needs the reminder that the most valuable things in life usually aren't the ones with the highest price tag. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to see you in the next story.